Today I analyze the book The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, published by psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk. Published in 2014, it has been consistently among the best-selling of all books in the United States. This is a screenshot of the New York Times list from August 9, 2022, and it's still #1 in nonfiction. This is a screenshot of the Amazon list, and it's number 17 among all books and #1 in psychiatry. And it's received over 55,000 ratings on Amazon. The impact of this book would be hard to underestimate. It is, for example, referenced in nearly every government and nonprofit agency proposal that aims to implement trauma-informed care. I've spent my career researching and treating trauma and PTSD, and I have a number of concerns about the pretty radical messages in this book, and I haven't seen any critical analysis of the book so far. The main messages of the book are these. #1, trauma damages the brain. The book makes this sweeping claim unequivocally many times. Quote, "We now know that their behaviors are not the results of moral failings or signs of lack of willpower or bad character. They are caused by actual changes in the brain." This is a typical statement in the book. Notice that it is not precise about what brain centers or neural networks are involved or how the brain changed. It references vague changes in the brain. This book does mention specific brain centers in other parts and reproduces some brain scans from studies, but it's hard to trust van der Kolk's interpretations of what they really mean. If you want to know a balanced story of how the true relationships between neurobiology and PTSD exist, those explanations are not in here. Instead, van der Kolk often takes an anecdote about a patient or a narrow research finding from a study and extrapolates into the philosophical realm much farther than any other researcher. He claims that trauma not only changes the brain, it changes the self. He wrote, quote, "We now know that trauma compromises the brain area that communicates the physical, embodied feeling of being alive," unquote, whatever that is. Or this quote, "We have also begun to understand how overwhelming experiences affect our innermost sensations and our relationships to our physical reality, the core of who we are." He's moved way past from a straightforward exploration of cognitive and emotional constructs and into the grandiose philosophical about reality and consciousness. A second message of the book is that van der Kolk believes that the current diagnostic taxonomy is all wrong. PTSD is inadequate to describe trauma survivors. Diagnosing comorbid disorders doesn't make sense to him, so he is a firm believer in complex PTSD, a mythical diagnosis I've critiqued in another video. A third message is that van der Kolk portrays himself as the foremost expert in the world on trauma because he was present during the 1980s and 1990s when PTSD research was new, and he was in the vanguard of doing innovative studies. But unfortunately, the powers in charge repeatedly didn't listen to his advice. Therefore, van der Kolk has a lot of concerns that many experts in this field are ignorant or misinformed, except for himself and, as he likes to point out, his highly placed and famous friends. And those other experts screwed things up and are often harming patients by their ignorance. The people who trained him didn't understand trauma. The coworkers in his clinics discuss patients all the wrong ways without recognizing trauma. Doctors misdiagnose kids with tons of comorbid disorders. There's too much reliance on medications that dope up people and takes away their, quote, motivation, play, and curiosity, unquote. Instead, these poor victims get victimized again by clinicians who don't know what they're doing using mainstream treatments. That's a common theme in nearly all of van der Kolk's writings and lectures. Not only is everyone else wrong, but worse, ignorant clinicians are causing harm to patients. All of those claims in the book, I would counter, are absolutely improvably wrong. A fourth message is that he advocates for a variety of treatments, which he calls more natural treatments. These include yoga, mindfulness, rhythmic movement, dance, theater, EMDR, bodywork, and neurofeedback. Approximately half the book is about these treatments. These natural treatments are ways of working with the body instead of talk therapy. It is a valuable discussion of non-traditional types of treatments. However, I don't think the treatments he discussed are as valuable for trauma as he thinks they are. I think his treatments are useful for emotional dysregulation and interpersonal issues, which are not PTSD responses. Those are the extra symptoms of the mythical complex PTSD that he believes in, or more of what I would call personality and trait problems. He is very negative about CBT and exposure therapies, which are the most well-studied treatments for PTSD. There's a lot to unpack in this book. Van der Kolk's grandiosity and narcissism are well covered in the critical reviews on Amazon's website, for example. So in the analysis of the next section, I'll limit myself to the science and address two questions. Number one, the first question is there research evidence to support Van der Kolk's claim that trauma damages the brain? This is an extraordinary claim, so there ought to be extraordinary evidence to back it up, especially considering that humans have been experiencing trauma for thousands of years, and it seems a bit lunatic to suggest that natural selection would have chosen traits that allow such fragile human brains. But specifically, in 2013, the year before the book was published, Julie DiGangi and colleagues had published a literature review of the pre-trauma prospective studies. Their conclusion refutes the claim that trauma damages the brain. The factors that Van der Kolk claims were caused by trauma were actually present before the index trauma. In 2021, I published a literature review that picked up where DiGangi left off, and I came to the same conclusion. There's also a very relevant study by Andrea Danese in 2017 about cognitive deficits in children who experienced maltreatment, which came to the same conclusion. I put links to all these studies in the description if you want to look them up. Yet Van der Kolk never seriously considered that the problems could have been caused by other things besides trauma. He dismissed genes being the cause of any of these symptoms with a tiny 1¼ page section in the book. The book never acknowledged that all the evidence he cited in humans was from cross-sectional studies, or that you really need pre-trauma prospective studies to speak intelligently about causation. In brief, if the book were truly about science, it would demonstrate equipoise and present both sides of the issue, but I didn't see any equipoise. The second question is, why is this book so popular? I think it's so popular because it fabricated an alternative reality that fits nicely with a very progressive, liberal political worldview at a time when the world is fracturing along liberal versus conservative politics. Professionals in mental health are overwhelmingly liberal, which is not my opinion. It's been documented in research. An influential blogger named Curtis Yarvin coined the concept he called the cathedral to describe the dominance of many liberal ideologies today. The cathedral is an amalgam of professors in academia and journalists in the press to preach progressive values through coordinated messaging that essentially creates an alternative reality. Van der Kolk's book has been one of the main pillars of a fabricated reality about the impact of nurture that doesn't exist in fact. The other pillars would be Dr. Vincent Folletti and his body of research on adverse childhood experiences, and the activist work of pediatrician Jack Shonkoff at Harvard to promote the myth of toxic stress. I think the massive attractiveness of the book is summed up in the implied message that by believing trauma damages the brain, it gives the believer the greatest moral status among all people in the tribe because they can believe they are champions for repairing the mind, body, and the soul of disadvantaged victims. They not only can treat symptoms of trauma and PTSD, they can holistically treat the entire human being. The fabricated reality message of the book is that nurture shapes who you are, and people who are disadvantaged are that way because they were victims of bad things happening to them. In summary, The Body Keeps the Score promotes a very skewed presentation of the science. There are a lot of books out there in the mental health and self-help genres that are counterfactual, uninformed, and misleading. So I'm not sure I can say it's the most misleading scientific book ever written in psychiatry, but it does stand out for the way Van der Kolk packaged the message to make it so popular. Instead of The Body Keeps the Score, it should be called Bessel Creates a New Reality. That's my analysis. Thanks for watching. Please hit the thumbs up icon and help me out by becoming a subscriber.